was like that. But that was Fati was my name, okay? Fatima. But here in the township, they used to call me Fati. They never used to call the Ma. Okay? Fati, not Fatima. So everybody knows me as Fati.
So Fatima, Fat. When did you first come across the space?
So it was quite by accident. I was friends with Sue Clarke, and she lived at 275 Long Street, just opposite where the first space was. And one day I went to visit her, and she told me about this exciting new theater that was opening right at her doorstep. And I had no clue what she was talking about because I didn't know really anything about theater then. But she insisted that we go across the street to volunteer to help. And that's how it all began. So usually when I went to the town, we'd go to the space in the evenings while they were still working and volunteer to clean up, pick up the garbage and stuff and little things, or make tea for the guys who were working there. And that's how I came across the space.
So how did it come that you actually turned up at the Barn Theatre to raise money for the space?
Okay, because of that connection that I had in the beginning when Sue Clarke used to take me there, they needed a black person who was in theater to come and read the poems, because they were the poems of the black poets, Wally Surute and all those guys. And so I offered to go to Guguletu to look for Mr. Ken Bosman, because at that time he was the only guy that I knew who was involved in community theater. So I went to find him, and when I found him in his house, he told me that he was unable to do that gig on that day because he had another appointment. So when I went back to Brian, we started to think, who else can we find? So Brian said, why are we looking? We've got a black person right here. And I said, who? He said, you. I said, me? And he said, of course, you can read poems. And that's how it happened.
And the poem was what?
There were several poems that were chosen at that time. There was one by Joyce Kakano, which I remember very clearly, because she was in exile, and we were really taking a chance by reading that one. You read one by Wally Surute and Oswald Mchali. There were 5 poems all in all, but Madam Please was supposed to be the finale of the 5 poems. The other poems I had to read from the book during the performance, but Madam Please I had to do by heart. And Bunny gave me the song, and I took it home and I memorized the words. And we were in a funny place. It was like a staircase because there was no room. Everybody was working on all the rooms in the space at that time, turning it into a theater. So there was nowhere to rehearse really. So we're in this staircase situation that had a door. So we closed this door and we sat on the stairs. And I really loved this poem, because at that time, here in the townships, we had a group that we started, a youth group, which was called the Black Mambas. And it was, in the beginning, it was an innocent group in the sense that what we did, we read a lot. We used to go to the American, information services. And we used to get a lot of books that were not available in South Africa. And we followed the Black Panthers. We used to follow Martin Luther King. Everything, even Angela Davis, when she was arrested, we followed that trial. And we used to come and sit together and discuss these things. We read Credo Muto when he first published, and he was so exciting when we first read Indaba, My Children. And it was a very wonderful time. It was like a renaissance for us, really, with a view to really look at the political situation in South Africa. And we formed this group. And this group used to go around. We used to perform in churches in Athlone, do poetry and stuff like that. But what had happened was that when the police began to suss what was happening, they then began to chase certain members of the group. And eventually, some of them left in 73 to go into exile. And that's how the group broke down and became non-existent. So it was a very interesting time for me to come into that area of the space theater, because there was a lot that was happening in my world too, in that sense.
But particularly Madam Please, which was written by Barney's son, okay?
Yes, it was a song in the musical period. Barney wrote the lyrics, and then the black artists did the music.
Now, in the time of Madam Please, I mean, What was the situation with the madam and the maid, shall we say, at that particular time? How I mean, the song points to the fact that the madam didn't know a damn thing about it.
Yes.
So if you could explain that to us, because this is an American audience, they don't know about what it was like in the early 70s and beginning before.
You see, there's a thing about maids and madams in this country, and our generation, most of us have never worked as maids, but our parents did, and we always wondered at the patience that our parents had for white people. My mother worked for the superintendent of this township, Mr. Rogers, before the Group Areas Act. And they lived on the main road here. If you see all these cottages that you see along the road, this is where all the people who managed this township lived, all the whites, and they worked for the Cape Town City Council, and they lived here. And my mother worked for Mr. Rogers for 30 years. And some nights, Mr. Rogers would want to take his wife out, and they would ask my mother to come and sleep with their children at their house, and we were left here with our father. And when you grow up, you didn't understand how your mother could do that. But for me, this became a bone of contention between me and my mother in 1977, after Mr. Rogers had retired. And my mother had kept this beautiful relationship with her master, because she still called him master, after that. And he lived in St. James. Every year at Christmas, Thomas, who used to be the gardener here, was now working for the municipality here in the township. And Thomas was the man who received the phone calls at work from the master. And he'd get on his bicycle, park it against the fence, come inside the house, knock on the door, take his hat off and greet my mother and say, the master says, next week or the week before Christmas, he's coming to see you. And that week, we knew, because my sister owned a butcher, we had to bring a leg of lamb, super, the best meat. We had to wrap this in brown paper, write with a black Cokie pen, Master Rogers, and it would stay in my mother's fridge. I used to be very upset with this system between the two of them. And when Master Rogers came, he'd come in his car, park it over there. And as soon as my mother would see him, she would say, here's the master. And she would just see the joy in her face. And she would run outside to meet him. And he would come out of the car, open his boot, because my mom loved plants. And he would bring my mother a huge tray of flowers and pot plants and things. And you could just see the joy between the two of them when they met. And they would come inside the house, and we were supposed to disappear. And my mother would lay out the table like she always did for him, and made tea, and they'd sit down and talk about the madam, about Vera and Maureen, the kids. And this was like a very sacred visit, because we were not allowed to be in the house when the master was here. And they really spoke to each other at that time. And then when the master left, my mom would take the leg of lamb from the fridge, carry it to the car for him. And when he got inside, she'd hand him the leg of lamb, and it would be Happy Christmas, Master. And that was the relationship they had every year until he died. But what bothered me was that in 1977, when the struggle started in 76, there was a war in Rhodesia. South Africa was just on the edges of a civil war in the sense of what had happened in Soweto. And every night at 7 o'clock, my mother used to come into this house like clockwork. She'd turn this television set on and look at the news. And when the news was over, she'd just switch it off, go out to my sister's house, which is not far from here, because she used to look after both houses. And every night as she went out, I used to hear her mumbling, God, I wonder if things are right for Maureen and Vera.
Could you say that again, God?
God, I wonder if things are all right for Maureen and Vera. And then one day, I used to hear this prayer as she went out of the house. And then one day, I got cross because I experienced the first child who was killed here in 76. And after that, death became a regular thing. And here was my mother worrying about two white kids that she had brought up who never had the decency to even write a postcard to say, thank you, nothing. It was just it. But my mother worried about them. And when I asked her about this, she said, yeah, these kids are in Rhodesia and they are married to farmers and, this war, they're killing the farmers there and everything. And I understood the point between them, but what I couldn't understand was the concern she had for them, when there were black kids who were dying on the street in South Africa. And so one day, I really confronted my mother about this. My mother turned around and said to me, shut up. There are certain things that you will never understand. And I didn't understand, but I shut up. And then, as this visit between her and the master happened every year, one day I just asked a simple question. Why do you still call him master? I mean, you don't work for him anymore. My mother turned around and said to me, shut up. There are certain things that you will never understand. Again, I shut up, but I didn't understand these things. So one day, I thought I'll ask her about this thing, I asked her, why do you still keep calling him master? You don't work for him anymore. And my mother turned around and said to me, shut up. There are certain things that you will never understand. And I was getting a little bit sick and tired of being shut up because I did not understand. And so the master passed away. I came home to find Thomas's bicycle against the gate as usual. And he had come to tell my mother that the madam had phoned to say that the master had passed away. After Thomas left, my mother said, Fati, she used to call me like that when she was not pleased. Fati, dial your sister's number at the office. And I dialed my sister's number at work. And she answered the phone and I gave it to my mother. And my mother said, Namahlubi, Mr. Rogers has passed away. He's being buried next week on Wednesday. I want you to bring your car around here at 8 o'clock in the morning because the funeral is at 10. And I am taking Thomas with me. My sister understood my mother more than I did. She just said, yes, it will be done. And on Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock, my sister parked a Mercedes-Benz 380 SE in Champagne with a sunroof in front of the gate. My mother was dressed in her best Sunday outfit, and Thomas, and they stepped into the car, sat in the back, and my sister drove them to bury the master. And I thought, well, that was that. A couple of years later, we were driving around the township. We went down Church Street. One day, my mom said to me, do you see this house? And I said, yes. She said to me, this was the first house I lived in when I came to Cape Town after I worked for Mr. Rogers. And the master said to me, when my family grows bigger, I must tell him he'll give me another house. So I shut up because now I was beginning to understand. Again, we drove past Brinton. And she said to me, do you see this house? And I said, yes. She said, after my first child was born and my second child was born, that house in Church Street was too small for us. I went to tell the master, and without a doubt, he kept his promise. He moved me to this house. It's my second house. So when we were all born, he gave her this house, which is where we now live. And where my father died, and she died in this house too. And I understood, when she said that to me. So I just kept silence. But Madam Please had that special meaning for me because all her life, my mother was a maid, all her life, and she had worked in other people's houses. And we had seen how at times we had to go to the place where she worked. And sometimes children weren't allowed to go there, but we had to try and sneak in so that she can see us. We used to go in one by one, so that at least she can ask each person, are you okay? Because we only saw her, like she came home once every fortnight. And if you've not lived that life, you don't understand the pain, because there are times when you're a little child, in the middle of the night, you need something and your mother is not there. And you begin to understand what the meaning of the system is all about. And Madam Please was a poem that tapped that anger inside me, that injustice that other people could have their moms, other people could not have their moms, at a time when most kids want to have their mothers with them. And it was such a pleasure for me it was an honor really to do Madam Please, because at that point I felt in my head that this is wonderful, because in a way it gives me the opportunity to explain something to these women who perhaps do not understand, what goes on in our lives. And also it gave me the opportunity to vent my anger. But instead, Barney Simon taught me a lesson that has stayed with me for the rest of my life. And it was such a valuable lesson in that sometimes you tend to look at a situation with a limited view, of seeing how the whole relationship between maids and madams happens. But what we forgot to look at in this country was the fact that these people did not know how we lived. They did not know. They were in that predicament because of the same system that was oppressing us. They were also being oppressed in the sense that they didn't know how the other half lived. Black people went into their homes, black people went into their businesses, black people went into their lives on a daily basis, and we knew them in that way, but they didn't know how we lived. And I did not understand Barney when he said to me, talk to this woman. Because I just wanted to run all over this woman and stamp the life out of her, really beat her up with my words. That's what I wanted to do. But when he kept on telling me, talk to this woman, I didn't understand what he meant. Because in my head, I thought, what do I have to talk to her about? She knows the situation. But really, they did not know. So Barney Simon taught me a very, very valuable lesson that I've always carried with me through my life at this point, was that don't look at things or people or things that happen in life with a limited view, because sometimes there is a reason for that which you think is not right. Always. Because in my mind, when he kept saying to me, talk to this woman, I thought, why must I talk to this woman? This woman knows the situation in this country. In fact, she is the cause of the situation in this country. So why must I talk to her, And yet, all along, this woman did not know how I lived. Once I sat down and I spoke to her, then I could see the tears in her eyes. I could see the understanding. And then I realized that it was always that thing that is called communication. Communication is very important. Well, there are instances in our lives where things happen, like there will be a funeral and you don't come to work. And you turn up on Monday and the madam is very, very angry because you didn't come to work. And the first thing that the madam forgets is that there are no phones in the townships. So you cannot reach a phone to tell her that, madam, somebody is murdered and I can't come to work, or because Africans have what is known as extended families, or we live on this block as neighbors. So in this block, if somebody passes away, we all have to go there, So these things happen. So when she said, madam, please, before you say that last Saturday's funeral was a lie, ask me how my people die. Madam, please, before you shout about your broken plate, ask about the meal her family ate. Madam, please, before you laugh at the watchman's English, try to answer in his Zulu language. Madam, please, before you say that the driver stinks, come, take a bath in a Soweto sink. Madam, please, before you ask me if your children are fine, ask me when I last saw mine. Madam, please, before you say that last Saturday's funeral was a lie, ask me how my people die. Ask about my mother. Is she old? Does she still cook? Does she sew? Ask about my father. Is he still looking for work? Ask about my brothers. Are they in school or are they in prison? Ask about my sisters. Are they having babies? Ask now what we want. Ask now how we live. Ask now if we breathe. Ask now, madam, please.
Okay, and you say, in a one-on-one situation, a woman who heard you say that, speak that afterwards.
Yes.
You were able to communicate with her.
Yes.
This in the space, do you Did the space enable you to express things, you know?
Yes. I was living at a very exciting time in South Africa in the 70s. And it was my great fortune also to be involved with the space, because I used to see situations happening in the townships. And I used to run up to Brian, and Brian would always be in the dark room, always processing something. And Brian was very fun. You know, he'd let you come into the dark room and tell him your ideas, and you're very excited. Brian, I want to do this play. And this is about this guy who lives in Langa. And this is how the story goes. And Brian says, carry on, Lavi, I'm listening. And we'd come out of the dressing room, we'll go to the cutting table, and I would tell Brian these stories. But that was the thing, you see. Because when the thing was cooking inside here, you had a place where you could dish it out immediately before it grew cold. That was the thing about the space. So that every time when you finish this one, you wanted to do the next one. When you finish this one, you wanted, and the thing that was most important, people never asked you about, do you have a degree in writing, in drama? No. You just brought your raw talent to the space as it was, and it would be turned into magic. And the first magic was the Sacrifice of Kreli. Because I tell you, we had problems with that play. Rob had problems with that play. But when Barney Simon stepped in and looked at it, in 2 minutes, he knew exactly what to do with it. And when we put the play up at the Market Theatre, it was magic. I kept asking the lighting person, is that my play really? And she kept saying, it's your play, darling. I couldn't believe it because, you know, he had that ability to turn something that was mediocre into something quite magical. But then it wasn't mediocre because it wouldn't be magical if it was mediocre in the beginning.
That's now having. So, did you feel better? I mean, for having the space to express your anger, did you feel that was a place you could express your anger and your feelings? Did you feel better afterwards?
Yes, because on a daily basis, I was living with white people on a daily basis. And I could see them as human beings like me. We had relationships, we had arguments, we fought, we did everything together. And the space brought us together under one roof in that sense. So that even the other people who came to work at the space with me as my casts in all the plays, they came in angry and they left very, very, it's not peaceful, they understood. When they left, they understood more about white people.
How did the community that you lived in feel about you working at the space?
They didn't like me at all. They thought I was selling out. I was always hanging out with white people, and I was always busy. I never had time to spend in the townships with other people. And they really resented me until I pulled them into the space through my plays to see what I was doing. And the magic caught them too. And then they began to realize that here was a place where anger gets turned into sense. You know, it's called waste, you know, making power out of waste.
That's, there was always fear. There must have been always fear of being arrested. Did you feel that at the space? Or in your life, I mean, sure, you know.
To tell you the honest truth, I think it's more scary to live in the township than it was to be at the space. The space was quite exciting. I always felt, and in my mind always, there was that whole thing that, how are they going to arrest the entire theatre staff and the audience? I mean, it was a joke, you know, but it was fun. I never had that fear. The only fear that I had was when plays were banned. And I was always scared that if one of my plays got banned, then that voice would be killed.
The space, I mean, you're saying the space meant much more than just a theatre. You're telling me about your friends who came there and who turned them around. Did you feel that?
Yes. Yes.
Explain that to me if you could. It was more than a theatre.
Yes, it was home. You could get up at 8 o'clock in the morning and eat breakfast, take your typewriter or your script and go to the bus stop and jump on the bus, and you just knew you were leaving the township behind. You traveled many lands and you went through many mines. You went through the caretaker. I remember seeing Bill Curry in the caretaker with a guy called Jonathan. He was from England. I can't remember his last name. Sherwood, yes. And it was my it was my first taste of theatre, and the acting was so good. I really resented Jonathan, but I loved Bill because he was so convincing in that role. I traveled many countries and many cultures and many different personalities through the space. I saw plays in my life, in my entire lifetime, that even now, I have not seen that much theatre. But the best part also was to see Fugard plays right at the beginning in their innocence, when the island was still Theodosha span. And I still remember specifically seeing Percy Sif in the statements. I didn't like him. After I arrested those two, I did not like him. I remember sitting through that whole interrogation and I was feeling it because I knew what it was like for them, because black people always are confronted by the police in that sense. I was sitting there with as if I had sand in my panties, and I was irritated because I wanted to scream to say, stop it, that's the feeling I had in statements. And that play stayed in my mind for a long time. Long before I even began to write, those seeds, were planted in my mind.
And you finally, you really travelled. Did the space help you to travel really physically?
Yes.
Tell us.
Yes.
You ended up in America, did you?
Yes. First of all, the space helped me to push me into the public eye, because for the first 3 years, I was the only woman playwright in town, and I was doing a play each year from 1976, 1977, 1978, and 1979. So when I was invited to the International Writers' Conference in Iowa, that was the culmination of all those years that I spent at the space. Really, it was like this was the biggest payoff I got, because from that point onwards, I never looked back.
And you ended up in New York for a while.
Yes. And I met Maggie Soboyle, and Maggie told me that Peter had been there and they'd done God's Forgotten, and Paradise is closing down at La Mama. And she took me to see Renee Shami, who was a lady who was a director. And she put me into contact with Ellen Stewart, who owned theatre. And from then onwards, things went smoothly. We did Glasshouse at La Mama. And then it was picked up by Lucille Lottel, who owned the theatre on Off-Broadway. And we took it to the City Theatre in Manhattan. And we played there for about 2 weeks. And from then onwards, we just toured around New York with the play.
So it's a long way from the space. You travelled a long journey.
Yes.
Tell me, what is happening now? What are you doing now?
Okay. We are at a very critical point in our country. I'd spoken to some artists, some writers in Joburg about it in 1991, a year before the elections. And I told them that the history of our country is changing. And we told them that we have to start looking at new things, at new issues to talk about. And at that point, I already had a play in my mind that I wanted to do. It was called So What's New? And I did that play, and it was very, very successful. Basically, we have social issues to look at this point in time. We have drugs coming into the country. We are still suffering from the after effects of 1976 in this country. We have problems with health, but basically the most important thing is housing and health. And we need to address those issues.
And this is what you are trying to address in your plays now?
Yes, I think next month I have a play that has been commissioned by the Baxter Theatre. It's called Street Walking and Company, Valet Services. Street walking is a township word for people who don't have regular jobs, who earn their money by shoplifting, stealing, that kind of thing. So in the olden days, when the police used to stop them and ask them for passbooks, they would take out their passbooks, but there wouldn't be the place of employment in the passbook. And the police would ask, where do you work? And the guy would say very quickly, Street Walking and Company, my bus. And then they would say, where is it? And then they would always give the Space Theatre's address, number 72 Long Street.
Thank you.